Congress created the Department of Justice, Congress funds the Department of Justice, and Congress is responsible for the oversight of the Department of Justice. When will we see justice? I'll tell you what I've not seen. I've not seen any arrests from the revelations in the Epstein files, over 3 million documents describing horrible things, describing unspeakable things, so much of it redacted. Over 24 people have resigned, CEOs, members of government worldwide. But I haven't seen any arrests or investigations here in the United States from this Department of Justice.
Thomas Massie shook Congress today. The room filled with his accusations. His main attack was aimed straight at the DOJ and the FBI. Massie accused them of deliberately protecting powerful and wealthy figures in the Epstein case. More than 3 million documents have surfaced. Arrests happen in other countries, but in the United States, no arrests, no real investigations, no answers. Massie said, this is not a lack of evidence. This is about the intent of the system. So the question is not what's inside the Epstein files. The real question is, why has justice stalled in America?
The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congress created the Department of Justice, Congress funds the Department of Justice, and Congress is responsible for the oversight of the Department of Justice. When will we see justice? I'll tell you what I've not seen. I've not seen any arrests from the revelations in the Epstein files, over 3 million documents describing horrible things, describing unspeakable things, so much of it redacted. Over 24 people have resigned, CEOs, members of government worldwide. But I haven't seen any arrests or investigations here in the United States from this Department of Justice. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, who has since been stripped of his royal titles due to his affiliation with Jeffrey Epstein, has been arrested. Peter Mandelson, who previously served as UK's ambassador to the United States, resigned in disgrace from United Kingdom's House of Lords and the Labour Party, and he's been arrested. Former Prime Minister of Norway, Torbjørn Jagland, has been charged, but we don't see any charges, arrests, or investigations in the United States. What do we see? We see our FBI director celebrating in the locker room at the Olympics overseas. It's fine to be proud of this country, but we should be proud of this country because we have a system of justice that works, and yet we do not. Who are the men that should be investigated? I'll name them right here. Leon Black. You don't even have to see past the redactions to see that this man needs to be investigated. Jess Staley, accused of terrible things. It's right there in the files. Why is he not being investigated? And Leslie Wexner, why did the FBI list him as a co-conspirator in their own documents in a child sex trafficking case and then tell him, according to him, that they had no questions for him? Why is that? Well, the Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the DOJ and the FBI to disclose to us their internal memos and emails about how they made those decisions, whether to prosecute or not prosecute. Yet they have not delivered those memos. And we still don't have the memos and documents and emails from 2008 to explain why Jeffrey Epstein was given such a light sentence in what would have been an open and shut case of child sex trafficking, which allowed him to go back and recommit these terrible crimes, create hundreds of more victims, and ensnare so many other people in his conspiracy. Where are those documents that describe those decisions? We need justice. We want the Department of Justice to get to work, and that's what they need to do now. Madam Speaker, I rise today to let the American people know that this government is under siege. All 3 branches of this government is under siege by lobbyists and lawyers from a German company named Bayer. They spent over $9 million lobbying the executive branch and the legislative branch so that they don't have to be liable for any damages that their herbicide causes, otherwise known as Roundup. And they're having some success. Now, they haven't had any success yet in this chamber to get that immunity. They've had some success in the state legislatures, which are also under siege, to get this immunity from liability. Look, the Constitution guarantees people a trial if they've been harmed. Why are we contemplating going against the Constitution? The Attorney General has opined favorably for this German company in front of the Supreme Court about getting rid of any liability that they should have for any damages. And the most recent thing that we've seen, the executive branch. By the way, the President's Chief of Staff and the President's Attorney General worked for one of the biggest lobbying firms that's received hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars from Bayer. And maybe that's why we've seen an executive order that says that the production of this chemical from this German company is a national defense priority. And we know why they're doing that. It's to keep them from having any liability. Everybody in this country deserves their day in court. This is wrong. We shouldn't succumb to the lobbyists, not in the executive branch, not in the judicial branch, and certainly not here in Congress, and not in the state legislatures, but there's a lot of money at play. And I implore my colleagues to resist it and do not give them immunity. And I yield back.
What Thomas Massie said on the House floor today did not come out of nowhere. His accusations were not based on rumors, not on social media claims, not on anonymous leaks. His remarks were grounded in years of reporting, court records, plea agreements, and government documents connected to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Massie's core charge was direct and serious. The problem in the Epstein case was never a lack of evidence. The problem was a lack of will. That claim is supported by the public record. There is no longer any dispute that millions of pages of documents related to Epstein exist. Those records include flight logs, financial transactions, victim statements, sealed testimony, internal communications, and federal investigative files. Multiple major news organizations have confirmed that even years after Epstein's death, a significant portion of these records remain sealed or heavily redacted. Massie pointed to a basic contrast that has already been established through reporting. Outside the United States, consequences followed. Inside the United States, they largely did not. Prince Andrew's association with Epstein led to public disgrace, the loss of royal duties, and a civil settlement. That outcome followed extensive reporting by British and international media based on sworn testimony and corroborated records. In Europe, Epstein's network triggered investigations, officials resigned, legal actions were taken, accountability followed. But in the United States, where Epstein's operations were centered, the picture looks different. In 2008, Epstein was given a non-prosecution agreement. Federal judges later described that deal as extraordinary and highly unusual. The agreement was reached despite prosecutors already having multiple victims, corroborating witnesses, and physical evidence. A federal court later ruled that the deal violated the legal rights of Epstein's victims. Massie focused on what happened next. Epstein was allowed to remain free. He returned to society, and for years he continued committing crimes. This is not speculation. It is documented in court records, victim lawsuits, and investigative reporting by major US news outlets. That is why Massie framed this as a system failure, not an evidence failure. He also named individuals whose connections to Epstein are documented in financial records and sworn testimony. Leon Black's financial relationship with Epstein has been publicly acknowledged. Reports have confirmed payments totaling tens of millions of dollars, supported by internal reviews and public statements. Jess Staley's association with Epstein became the subject of corporate investigations, board reviews, and regulatory scrutiny. These findings did not come from online speculation, but from formal internal probes later reported by financial media. Leslie Wexner's role has raised unresolved questions for years. Epstein controlled Wexner's finances, properties, and travel arrangements over an extended period. That relationship is documented through power of attorney agreements and financial records that have been publicly reported. FBI documents referencing Wexner have been acknowledged. Yet to this day, no comprehensive public explanation has been provided for why he was never charged or formally questioned. This is the gap Massie emphasized. Records exist, but accountability does not. Massie questioned why internal DOJ and FBI decision-making remains hidden, even after Congress passed transparency requirements. He specifically referenced the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which requires the Department of Justice and the FBI to disclose internal memos, emails, and records explaining why prosecutions were pursued or declined. As of today, those materials have not been fully released. That absence matters. Because without those documents, the public cannot evaluate how evidence was weighed, why cases were declined, or whether institutional or political pressures influenced those decisions. Massie's position is reinforced by statements from former prosecutors and judges. Several legal experts have said on the record that Epstein's 2008 plea deal was inconsistent with standard federal practice in child trafficking cases. That assessment is not political. It is procedural. In the second half of his remarks, Massie widened the lens. He warned that Epstein was not an isolated failure, but a symptom of a system increasingly shaped by money, lobbying, and legal insulation for powerful interests. He cited Bayer and Roundup as a parallel example. Federal lobbying disclosures show that Bayer has spent millions of dollars lobbying U.S. lawmakers and regulators. At the same time, the company faces thousands of lawsuits alleging harm from glyphosate-based herbicides. Massie argued that constitutional rights, including the right to a jury trial, are being weakened through legislative immunity and executive action. That concern has been echoed in dissenting legal opinions and by constitutional scholars who have warned against expanding corporate immunity frameworks. Across both issues, Massie's message was consistent. Justice is not failing because facts are missing. Justice is failing because accountability is uneven. Congress created the Department of Justice. Congress funds the Department of Justice. Congress oversees the Department of Justice. That is why Massie framed this as Congress's responsibility to confront DOJ and FBI leadership directly, not shield them. His conclusion was not a declaration of guilt against any individual. His claim was narrower and more damaging. The system has refused to explain itself. Until DOJ and FBI release their internal records, until prosecutorial decisions are exposed to public scrutiny, and until the same standards apply regardless of wealth or status, the Epstein case cannot be considered resolved. Not legally, not morally, not institutionally. And that is why Massie's question still hangs in the chamber. If the evidence existed years ago, if the victims existed years ago, and if the files still exist today, then only one question remains unanswered. Why did justice stop? If this breakdown helped you understand what is really at stake here, please support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, and staying with us for more record-based breakdowns.